franchise tags and extending void dates. What does that mean for the defensive tackle market for the Houston Texans?
Remember, project your voice if you don't have your mic.
Yeah.
All right, cool. 3, 2, 1.
To tie it all in, we want to develop a great team here that we can deliver wins to the city of Houston. We want to deliver a championship here to the city of Houston, and that's what it'll be about.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody, to a Thursday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. All the way from Fort Worth, Dallas, Texas, and this is my last day out here. It's your boy John Hickman, and of course, I am joined by none other than Cody Davis. I want to say this, man. Listen, when it comes to the Latin culture, the Hispanic culture, and the food, man, it ain't too many people that do it better than Houston. And listen, it ain't Dallas Fort Worth. I'll tell you that. Y'all will take
Well, Dallas Fort Worth doesn't do a lot of things better than the city of Houston. I'm just saying.
That's
I'm
very
just
true.
saying.
I had some Hispanic food, Mexican food the other day, and it was terrible. It was bad. So now I'm feeling to get back home so I can give me some real authentic Mexican food. But let's talk about the Houston Texans. Let's start off with the defensive tackle market for Houston is shaping up right before free agency, and things are going to get a little bit more clear as to who they can target and who's going to be out there on the market. The Vikings defensive tackle Dalvin Tomlinson had a deal that was set to void his contract in recent days. That would have pushed about $7.5 million of dead money onto the Vikings 2023 cap. However, the team and Tomlinson agreed to move that void date to March 15th, and that'll buy some time for a possible extension that will avoid the $7.5 million hitting that cap space. So right now it's likely that Tomlinson, who had a very good year for Minnesota, will return back to the Vikings for another year, and he was set to be a free agent this offseason. And also the Commanders are expected to place a franchise tag to Pro Bowl defensive tackle, my favorite defensive tackle out of him and Jeffrey Simmons, Daron Payne, according to Ben Standig. So those are two of, I would consider, some of the better options at defensive tackle that was, set to hit the market this offseason. And I kind of knew that the Commanders were going to get Daron Payne back. But that does shape out differently for the Houston Texans. It does change things how they can approach this offseason to address that position.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned those two guys, because I think had they had an opportunity to go out there and test the free agency market, I think those two guys would have been at the top of their free agency class at their position. And that's very important because, John, going into free agency, I would like to see the Texans try to see if they are going to meet a standard that I'm holding them to. And what I mean by that is every single position should come with a new standard into how they're going to improve this team. Because yes, there are some quality good players that the Texans will have an opportunity to go out there and sign. However, I want to know how are they going to benefit the Houston Texans in their rebuild. Remember, they're still in the early stages of the rebuild. However, in terms of the defensive line unit, that is where I really want to see the Houston Texans spend most of their top dollars in free agency. Because when you take a look at the potential talent that they can get in the draft, you look in the first round, everyone, including you and myself, we are expecting the Houston Texans to go out and draft a quarterback and pair him with a wide receiver. With that said, you're going to miss out on arguably the two best defensive linemen coming out in this year's draft. With that being said, I do believe that in terms of D'Amico Ryans coming over as a defensive-minded coach, you know what type of defensive philosophy he's going to bring, especially one for a team that needs to stop the run, because for the third consecutive season, like we mentioned, ever since they let DJ Reader go, this is a team who has given up over an average of 130 yards on the ground. Last year, it was 170. And when I take a look at the improvements that the Houston Texans need automatically, we ain't got time for you to draft no second, third, fourth round prospect and give them time to develop in hopes of stopping a run and improving the Houston Texans defensive line corner. No, you need to, starting, I believe it's March 13th is the legal tampering period. And I think people are able to sign with their new team on the 16th, if I'm not mistaken. Starting on March 13th, that defensive line unit is where I want to see the Texans especially attack in free agency. You got some money, go out there and use it.
Yeah, and I think there are 3 options right now that Houston should look at. And I break it down like this: difference maker, a player that I think can come in and be a part of your rotation and be effective as a depth player. And then we got one of those players who I believe can be in between. Maybe he can be a starter. Maybe, he can be a very good starter alongside of Malik Collins when I look specifically at the defensive tackle position. Or maybe he can be somebody that can be another rotational player, but is a dominant one, like Charles Lynn, who was able to be in San Fran. So first I want to look at David Onyemata, right? Played for the New Orleans Saints, officially had 5 sacks last season, 11 quarterback hits, plus a fumble recovery, as well as 43 tackles. 25 of them were solo, 5 tackles for loss. Pro Football Focus charted him with 35 total quarterback pressures. And he's a player that I believe can be one of those in-between players, right? I think that he can come in and help out what I think his running mate would be in Malik Collins, right? And I think that if he's not a starter day one, if Houston decides to maybe invest in that position in the draft, he can still be very valuable to this team. Then secondly, I look at a depth player where I think Houston could use a guy like this. Now, y'all may not like this, but I look at a player strictly off of what he can be as a rotational player, and that's Taven Bryan, formerly the first-round pick for the Jacksonville Jaguars, spent last season with the Cleveland Browns. And I think Houston does need a more impactful depth player. Between Michael DeWumford, Jaden Johnson, and Taylor Starworth, I believe all of those players are replaceable. Bryan totaled 26 tackles and a career high in 3 sacks last year. Could be a nice rotation player if Houston builds that line around just build talent on that line. He can come in and help out and be one of those guys that could either be a decent starter or a backup player if those edge guys, the play from the edge, the DNs and the edge players are, upgrade. Now, the difference maker. The guy that I believe if Houston does bring him in, he changes the trajectory of what we, would project this team to be. And that's Javon Hargraves from the Eagles. Listen, still to be a stud signing for Houston. I immediately think of adding Hargraves would be monumental for Malik Collins. Malik Collins has not had a great running mate next to him since being in Houston. So that's number one. And I think he'd be great for a second-year defensive tackle, Thomas Booker, one of those players that can be a coach on and off the field in the locker room. And I think that he can help some of those young guys like Booker progress in his game, like a Roy Lopez, who will still be here because it's under contract unless Houston decides to move on for him if they upgrade. And I think even when I look at Taven Bryan, he can be an upgrade over Roy Lopez. But those guys, Kurt Hennish, those are players that you would want Javon Hargraves to be around so he can be able to coach them up on and off the field. Last season, 11 sacks. That was a career high. 34 pressures, 10 tackles for loss. He just be huge for us. And the Eagles would have a hard time bringing him back because they got to get a deal done for Jalen Hurts. So the money won't unnecessarily add up. I don't see how they'd be able to keep him. My only concern is right now, the tier 1 defensive tackle market right now is around $20 million. And I think that maybe just maybe too much. Is that too much? But then what's the price can you put on a player that can immediately upgrade you in a dire need? And that's helping stop the run. That's helping create pressure up the middle. That's helping being a centerpiece and allowing the other 3 or 4 guys around the line of scrimmage to play monumentally better. That is what Javon Hargraves will be able to bring to any franchise. And I think he'd help out Houston tremendously in that area. So right now, the NFL is currently in the offseason. We're waiting for the free agency period to start, then the draft. The midway point of the NBA season is here. And now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, the America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel app right now. It's safe, it's secure, and most importantly, it's super easy to use. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine for a bigger chance at a bigger payout with same game parlays. Don't miss your chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner with the NBA and the NFL.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this Thursday installment of Locked On Texans. One more day before I have to look at Houston Rockets basketball again, unfortunately. Love my job, but man, I just wish it was better product there on the court. And as of right now, they will return from the All-Star break without Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr., which means the product is going to be a little bit more unwatchable. But with all that being said, from one rebuilding team to another rebuilding team who has the chance to improve their talent on both sides of the ball, John, we opened up this segment talking about how important it was for the Houston Texans to put money into that defensive front. And I think we all can agree that's probably the most important position group. Linebacker is probably a close second, or offensive lineman, giving your take, that they should invest the most money. However, when you take a look at that defensive front, I would like to see the Texans really invest in getting a very good, my term, quality, solid, a very good defensive tackle that can actually help you stop the run and get after the quarterback and wreak havoc on the opposing team offensive line. However, with that being said, John, I'm a little bit conflicted because I do want to see the Houston Texans put more money in actually upgrade with their edge rushers, because as of right now, I know Jerry Hughes is coming off a phenomenal good season, by the way. I think he might be the Texans' best offseason acquisition from last year. Thankfully, like Steven Nelson, had an opportunity to get him on a 2-year deal. He finished this past season with a team-high 9 sacks. He still got something left in the tank. However, John, at the start of next season, he's going to be 35 years old. And at some point, he's going to start showing his age, which means the Houston Texans are definitely going to have to look at who's going to be the next edge rusher to step up. Yes, you have Jonathan Grenard on the opposite side of the defensive line. However, he cannot stay healthy.
Can't trust what you can't trust.
Exactly. We are going into what? He didn't really play too much in his rookie campaign, but, looking at his sophomore year and his junior year, it was like every single year we had so much expectations for John Grenard, and unfortunately injuries got into the way. You take a look at what he did in his sophomore season. He played 12 games and finished with 8 sacks. That's very good. We placed high expectations on John Grenard for this upcoming season in 2022, and look what happened. 8 games, a sack and a half. That is not going to cut it. So when I look at this defensive line unit, like I mentioned, yes, I want to see them, and I think it's more important for them to address the defensive tackles. However, outside on the edge, you got an aging Jerry Hughes, and you got a guy who I do believe can probably, let's say, be a second-tier edge rusher if he reaches his potential. However, availability is the best ability, and unfortunately, John Grenard has not been available through the first quarter of his career so far.
Yeah, you know what? I'm looking at something really quick. I wanted to check to, okay, so he's 6'5". All right. Then I look at John Grenard. And John Grenard, he is 6'3". Okay. What if, just throw this idea out there because it just came to me, really. What if John Grenard is eventually moved inside, like Charles Omenihu was for the San Fran 49ers?
I wouldn't like that. I wouldn't like that only because this.
You know, he does have a smaller frame. Charles Omenihu is 6'5". And I look at John Grenard, he is 6'3", 263 pounds, compared to a Charles Omenihu, who is 6'5", and as of right now, he is around 280 pounds. So he is smaller in frame when I look at John Grenard. But again, I am trusting DeMeco Ryans to find ways to pull the best out of the players that's already on this roster. You can't come in year one and immediately have an entire roster shake up and change.
That is true.
And we don't know. We just don't know. And like we said, you can't trust what you can't trust when you look at John Grenard and his health situation. There was moments last year when he was on the field where it was like, okay, we just need you to do some of that for 4 quarters for out of a 17-game season, 13 to 14 games, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll be able to properly evaluate you. But now when I look at John Grenard, I think the proper evaluation is, man, we can't trust you to stay on the field. And that's not a knock to his skills. It's just that he hasn't been able to do so far. But when we talk about the edge rusher position, Cody, I get it. I understand. But I cannot sit here and look at a team that allowed 170 rushing yards on the ground and say to myself, a major upgrade at defensive tackle isn't a necessity. And I'm sorry. And I like I like the thought of, upgrading that edge position because you are 100% right. Jerry Hughes is getting old. He is 35. And I don't know if he was on that Michael Jordan Space Jam. I don't know what he was on last year, but he played some damn good football. Mario Addison was a player that, I believe he can play in and out, but he didn't play a lot last year due to injury as well, and wasn't really just eye-popping whenever he did play. I don't think there's no way around it. In the draft, in free agency, Houston has to find a way to get better with the interior defensive line. And what's funny about it is they also got to find a way to get better with the edge position, with your defensive ends, right? I think both of those are almost identically important. But you were able to somewhat get after the quarterback last year. Maybe not as consistently as you want to, but you were able to have moments where you were able to get sacks on quarterbacks, right? When I look at Houston and their sack total, and I'm going to look it up, but you were not able at any point throughout the year on a consistent basis. I think they had maybe 2 games where they held the running back or a team under 100 yards. In 2022, you weren't able to do that. And so this league is all about controlling what you can control and getting better at what you need to get better at. I can't sit here and say that 170 yards on the ground per game through 17 games, and you have got statistically worse each year without DJ Reader isn't an area of need. When I look at what the Houston Texans were able to do in terms of sacks, the Texans had 38 sacks and they allowed 39 sacks. I would take 38 sacks. I got 38 sacks, but I cannot take and accept 170 yards on the ground. So, again, they brought in Chris Kiffin. They kept D-line coach Jacques Cezier. I think those 2 guys are going to be able to work together in order to, along with DeMeco Ryans, in order to scheme up how can the first 2 levels of the Houston Texans improve to stop the run, because the linebackers had a lot to do with it as well, right? We're being completely honest with you. We didn't see Christian Kirksey play well until we saw Christian Harris get on the field and saw him progress as a rookie throughout the year. It allowed Christian Kirksey to, play downhill when Kamu Grugier-Hill was, allowed to move on in his career. So it is going to take the first 7 guys on this defense to improve. But it starts right up front. It always starts right up front. and they got to improve that defensive tackle position, which is why I go back to Javon Hargraves. Right, I don't know how realistic that is, and maybe spending $20 million. Maybe I don't know how they would construct that contract. Maybe it's a certain amount this year, and then next year when Houston has a substantial amount of more money, they pay him more. I don't know, but I think he is a player that he is a plug and play and dominate type of guy that can change that entire defensive tackle unit.
And when you talk about the improvements that this defensive line unit can make, I still go back to John Gennard because I still think a lot is still riding on his shoulders. John, really quick to your point about switching him and getting him to the inside of that defensive line unit. I don't like it only because this will be John Gennard's 4th year in the league, and this will be his 3rd time switching positions, having to learn a whole entire new position. Because remember, when he got here as a rookie, the defensive coordinator was Anthony Weaver, and he was listed as a linebacker. They got Lovie Smith. You put him at defensive end, which the first year of that experiment was really good. However, second year, like we keep mentioning, due to injuries, he regressed. Now he is going on his 3rd defensive coordinator. Of course, defensive coordinator, defensive coach in terms of DeMeco Ryans. I just don't want to see him continuously bouncing from position to position because eventually that will start.
It wasn't a real change for him. He had defensive end experience, and I think the only reason why it was maybe like, what is he going to do at the end compared to playing the 3-4 linebacker is his body size and frame. He's 6'3", 260 pounds. That may be more fit for outside linebacker compared to a traditional DN. But he played it in college, and he was successful at it. So that wasn't a real.
It was concern for me. And once again, with this team still being in the early stages of their rebuild, especially with these young players that they have, that's what I don't want to see the Houston Texans do, because we've seen in the past of how they bounce players from position to position to position, and it starts to hinder their development, i.e. Lonnie Johnson Jr. Remember the corner, safety back to corner when he was fine at safety. Then they switched his behind back to corner for some god awful reason. Don't know why, but that's neither here or there. But god
awful.
Yeah,
maybe that was on his own merit.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, like you mentioned, at the end of the day, it's all going to go back to trusting DeMeco Ryans and his coaching staff, more so DeMeco Ryans, on that defensive side of the ball to get the best out of the players who are here. Now, in addition to John Gennard, I also do believe that when you look at the improvements that the Houston Texans need to make with the interior defensive line, a lot is also going to be riding on the shoulders of Roy Lopez. He looked good his rookie season. For some reason, like almost everybody else in that sophomore class, eventually he hit this sophomore slump. But if he can get back to the player, but of course better because of the experience that he have, that we saw the potential throughout his rookie campaign, that interior defensive front is going to be 10 times better as well.
Yeah, and I would say this. I think that with Roy Lopez, he hits moments before we move on. He has hit moments throughout his short career where for a couple of weeks he looks good. For a few weeks he looks clueless. Then he kind of gets back to it. I thought that Roy Lopez, especially, I thought the entire defense for Houston looked different, better to close out the year last year. And I thought Roy Lopez benefited from whatever change Lovie Smith made. So he's a guy that I do want to see Roy, just like Thomas Booker, who I think, will improve. But I want to see Roy and Booker and those young defensive tackles. I want to see them with at least 1 year, especially Roy, because he's been in the league this will be his 3rd year. At least 1 year under DeMeco Ryans and his coaching staff to see, what can they do to get the most out of him. Welcome back in, Locked On Texan listeners. It's Thursday, man. The weekend is almost here. And if you are a parent, 2 weeks till spring break.
Oh.
Yeah. And I get to enjoy that for the first time in forever. But some good news for the Houston Texans. Some real good news for Cody Davis. You know what it is, Cody?
What?
The Houston Texans have retained running back coach Danny Barrett. I think that is a phenomenal decision.
Yes, sir.
But they already announced
my guy.
quarterback coach Dino Vasso, but bringing back Danny Barrett. Let me tell you why I think that's important for DeMeco Ryans. I think the running back coach was one of those position coaches that didn't need to be touched at all, right? If you evaluate what Danny Barrett was able to do in his time with and without a running back, his first year in Houston, Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson. That was a very good tandem for Houston. Carlos Hyde had reached 1,000 yards for the first time in his career, and Duke Johnson was one of those do-it-all utility backs that played well for the Houston Texans. For some reason, that offseason, they traded DeAndre Hopkins for David Johnson.
The downfall begins.
Carlos Hyde, and the downfall of the running back position, starts to spiral out. But last year, he got him a guy. He got him a young buck in Dameon Pierce. And it wasn't the running ability that, really showed, right? I think that if you go back and watch this tape at Florida, Dameon Pierce was always a good runner, a hard, tough runner, right? But I think it was the small things that would make an NFL running back successful in the league that you were able to see get better and better each week when he was healthy and on the field, blocking out of the backfield, picking up blitzes when it was necessary. Like those things, hitting the holes when you need to hit the holes, because the transition from college to the NFL is different because the holes are smaller. You got to know when and when not to hit it. Those were some of the things that we were able to see out of Dameon Pierce improve on. And I think the joy and happiness of Danny Barrett whenever he talked about Dameon Pierce last year was phenomenal. Also, the Titans released wide receiver Robert Woods. You do with that information as you may. Does it make sense for Robert Woods to stay in the AFC South with the Houston Texans? Of course, that depends on the amount of money Woods would accept in free agency, but it also depends on where Woods wants to go. I'm pretty sure he wants to be, competitive again and play with a team that can compete after playing for the LA Rams for a couple of years. The Dallas Cowboys. Now, this is a position that Cody and I hadn't really talked about, but the Cowboys are not expected to franchise tag tight end Dalton Schultz. So, let's talk about that next time we talk football. Does it make sense for the Houston Texans to target this tight end? DeMeco Ryans is coming from the San Francisco 49ers, Cody, where they had who? George Kittle. Very good tight end. And when you look at the tight end group for the Houston Texans, you can sit here and say, well, let's wait and see if they can develop. Very underwhelming, right? And I also think if he's available in the third round, the Houston Texans should possibly go out and get Darnell Washington, the tight end out of Georgia. I love him. He's nasty. He's a nasty blocker, and he can do some things in space with that big body frame. So the tight end position is an interesting one because you can sit here and say, wait and see. Is it an immediate upgrade, a need for upgrade in year one, or do you upgrade every other position and allow that tight end to come along itself?
I say, depending on what they could, like, if they could get, it all depends on what they get in free agency. If you could get a good veteran in free agency at that position, I feel like you can use that third round pick on a other position that you might need to upgrade. But I think this is the benefit of having part of the benefits of having free agency before the draft. Like you get an opportunity to build out your roster with veterans, and then go out and see what type of prospects you can bring in. Because the only reason why I don't want to see the Houston Texans draft tight end, especially that high, you'll be looking at the third consecutive year where you draft a tight end. And then we got to see them go through the carousel waves of getting themselves established, getting their foot in the door. And, how's that going to affect how's that going to impact the tight ends that you already have on your roster, i.e. TQ, who we think is going to probably have a solid sophomore campaign, given the promise that he finished off the season with. And of course, Brevin Jordan, like he just got lost in the shuffle last year. But It's going to be very interesting to see how they go about attacking the tight end position, whether it's free agency or the draft. However, with that being said, I'm just so happy that they had an opportunity to keep Danny Barrett, man. Phenomenal guy when you get an opportunity to talk to him away from the mics, away from the camera and stuff. And I always wanted to see the Houston Texans keep him, because not only has he been a very good position coach for that running back room, i.e. Dameon Pierce, but you can actually see that him and Pierce has a relationship and a trust factor is there. Remember early on in the 2022 campaign when we was whining and complaining as to why Dameon Pierce wasn't on the field for this particular play. He had 2 fumbles in a game against the Bears and they benched him and stuff or whatever. Dameon Pierce spoke on several occasions how he was able to overcome those mistakes due to the relationship that he has with Danny Barrett, and for the expectations and the high hopes that I think we all have for Dameon Pierce, you have to be sure that you keep somebody in his corner, a coach like that, to make sure to help him get to that next level.
Thank you guys for checking out today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter. Man. Twitter's a funny place. At Locked On Texans, and then scroll over to YouTube and make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Texan podcast on YouTube as well. Y'all see my name down there, John_Hickman12. It's off season, man. It's time for me to change my name up for the next few months. So I'll figure out what I want it to be. But give me a follow, give me a holler, shot at me. Let's talk football.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, it's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.